Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future Construct podcast. This is our special edition in partnership with KP Reddy from Shadow Ventures. Hi, KP.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm great, and I am still Amy Peck. And today we have with us Ali and Edgar from Aren, who are the CEO and COO, respectively. And would you give us, your last names as well and a proper introduction? Ali, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, Amy. So I'm Ali Khaloo, and I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Aren, and we're based in New York City.
And I'm Edgar Martinez Ceja, the COO of Aren and the other co-founder. And it's a pleasure to be with you here, Amy and KP.
Great. Well, we're very excited to have you. And before we kind of dive into Aren, how did you get into this industry? And then we're going to talk a little bit about KP like he's not here. How did you meet KP?
Good questions. So let me start with this. I mean, all my studies and is in civil engineering. So I have always been part of the industry, if you will. Going back in time, so I did my undergrad in civil engineering, then worked as a civil engineer, designed new buildings and bridges, and did inspections of them and all those kind of good stuff. Then at some point I was like, why did I went to school to do this kind of stuff, like hanging from a bridge and count cracks? So for my graduate school, which I again continued in civil engineering, this time structural engineering, I started to look into how we can use technology to see, how our built environment behaves in general. So I started with different sensors in my master's and attaching different sensors to the structures and reading those information and seeing how, if things are wrong or not. And then at some point I was like, this is still, pretty cool technology, solid technology, but it's not scalable. You still need to attach different things to bridges and buildings, and that's very expensive. So you have to look into something more scalable. So for my PhD, I started to look into how you can bring AI, mix that with civil engineering knowledge to actually do this at a scalable way. And after that, so finished my PhD on that one, did my postdoc on AI, and then started Aren. So I've always been part of civil engineering industry, if you will.
And how about you and Edgar?
So on my side, Amy, I'm a firm believer that, you can change the world faster if you're able to bring research to market faster, right? So I'm a mechanical engineer. And at some point in my life, I was doing research on robots that walk on two legs. And I think the research world, I think it's super cool, right? I think the part that I was always a little bit frustrated is you get extremely well trained to become an academic, but you get zero training on how do you apply that, right? Like to solve the big problems that we have. So I became very obsessed with that. And after grad school, I did a startup around technology, and then did, business school, management consulting, just to learn the other side, right? Did some corporate, and eventually I went back to my advisor, helped some of his colleagues to assess research that could go to market and help them do that. And later on, I met Ali, right? And, we were talking about, the big impact that it could have to address the issues of civil infrastructure, right? But not using just like day-to-day technology out there, but using things that are really a breakthrough, right? And that's how we started working on this.
I love that. And then how did you come to meet KP?
So we're finding someone visionary, right? Like we believe that you need to have vision to change the world, right? You just don't change the world just because you're nice and hard work, right? Like you really need to have vision, and that's really hard, right? Like to actually act on it is extremely hard. And we've talked to a lot of people to find who would be the right believer, right? And honestly, like there's very few people that get the specifics of the built environment, right? Like there's a lot of VCs out there that, you know, are trying to change the world in a very generalistic, right? Like, but someone that gets and that jump into the hottest thing, right? Like, but someone that really gets the industry and understands the challenges. You know, when we talked to KP, we found out that he really gets it, right? And so we, you know, started talking with him and ended up, you know, having him as our lead investor, which we're super excited.
I love that. I was hoping for a little, you know, a little more dirt, but okay.
I was gonna say, I think you're framing the question incorrectly. It's like, how did you first meet KP, and tell us about your regrets?
I'm trying. You're still talking to him.
Yeah, like I don't understand. Like, clearly you don't know him. Like,
well, maybe let me add something to that whole, you know, our first conversations with KP. So, as Edgar mentioned, there are lots of VCs out there investing in prop tech and construction tech in general, but very, very few of them actually understand civil engineering, and KP is a civil engineer. So the first conversation I start to talk about, yes, I did civil engineering, I designed things, I inspected things. I think KP just related to all of that pain, and I think that, you know, made the conversation way easier.
All right, you're still being too nice. I'm handing it over to KP. I've got
I think, you know, I think it's interesting, you know, when, you know, a lot of the stuff that you look at in, you know, in startup world is like made up, like we're solving made up problems, right? Like, I don't think I needed a pizza delivery app. I think that was just like pizza delivery was working just fine. Like, I'm not sure. And so I think, you know, when you're working with startups that are actually solving real problems, like they don't have to explain like, what's our TAM? It's like, it's the world. Like the TAM is like the world, right? It's not this like, oh, let me explain and here's the players, you know, so, you know, I think fundamentally like working with founders out of research, they're actually solving problems, not made up problems. And so many of the startups out there, when they talk about product market fit, it's really about like not solving. Product market fit has very little to do with like solving an actual problem. It's just like, will the market pay for it, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're solving a problem. We all pay for lots of garbage that doesn't solve any problems. But so I think it is super different, like when you're talking to folks that actually come from the problem-solving world.
Edgar, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, and maybe I'd like to pull it apart a little bit, is that, you know, you research, you know, you come out of university and academia, and it teaches you how to research and how to look at data, but it doesn't necessarily teach you how to connect it to the real world. So what are some of the ways that, as you were looking at, you know, how you wanted to scale Aren, like how did you connect the dots there? Like how, you know, to go to market?
I mean, connecting the dots in between research and market, it's really hard, right? And the reality still today, right, is that you have the world of research, right? And then you have the world of business, right? And in very rare occasions, they talk to each other, right? And they see each other sometimes as foes, right? Like one side, the business side says like, well, those guys are just, you know, playing around with cool gadgets, but that's it, right? And the guys that are doing the research, they look at the other guys and like, well, they just care about like making money, right? And that's about it. How do the dots get connected? That's a great question, right? I think it, as a society, it's going to take a lot of work to get there, right? I think there's some groups still counted with one hand probably that are trying to do that, right? You have people like KP, you have people like the Cornell program at Cornell Tech, the Runway Startup Postdoc program that where we actually met, right? That are working on that. We have some folks in California doing that, right? But there's a lot of work. Now, how did we connect those dots, right? It's by talking to a lot of people before jumping in to really understand the problem, right? You just don't, even as a researcher, right? Like you just don't like wake up one day and say, oh, this is a winning idea of how I'm going to forget about make money, like about how am I going to change the world, and ding, it suddenly happens, right? Like the amount of work that we did in just having conversations with people from the industry and understanding what are your big problems, right? Like what are you like what's a nice to have and what's going to change the world, right? Like that, I mean, we've had thousands of those conversations, right? And it's only through those that you eventually start to get a grasp of like, okay, if I use research on this way, right, I could potentially help change the world, right? But that's like, you know, getting to know the industry even through conversations, right? That's how, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Edgar brings up a great point. When, you know, NSF has done it, is on the right path with some of their I-Core coaching,
Yep.
you know, because it used to be the government gave out grants with zero expectation of follow through. It's just like, we're just going to keep giving you money, right? So now they're saying, hey, these research folks that are getting grants, you have to go through this I-Core program.
Yep.
And do customer discovery and go interview and, you know, do all the work that maybe most startup founders just like, of course, like, why wouldn't you do that? But so I mean, I think it's early days. I like what I-Core's done. I think to Edgar's point, like, I think there's a terrible like problem in venture right now, though, is that it's like minimum viable product. Everything's minimum, you know, capital light, MVP. And that's really cool if you're building some cute app, right? Offshore to somebody in India, and for 20,000, they build an app and blah, blah, blah. I think that's, you know, that's fine. But when you start talking about, oh, we have a vision to solve the nation's infrastructure, not only does it take more capital, because you have to have like really, really smart people working on it, but it also takes time. And I think that's where like you can overcapitalize a company by just throwing tons of money at them. But solving problems just takes time. And you can't always, you know, just throw more bodies at it. It doesn't always work that way.
I think that there's also, you know, talking about this whole vision notion, you know, at what point does, you know, it's like a solution looking for a problem, or that the vision is so revolutionary that it's like almost impossible to articulate. But we recognize it as a problem, and how you're approaching it, you believe is the solution. I think it's that kind of that telling that story of how to get there. And I'd just love to hear just again, you know, who are your customers now? I think you've done all the right things, right? You've been speaking to customers, you've got, you know, smart money behind you. But that is 1% of what needs to happen now. Not to be, you know, make this daunting, but, you know, how are you guys going to tackle, you know, what was it, the best way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time? Like, what is the first bite, and then what's bite 25?
I mean, that's a great question, right? I think, you know, things start with, you know, I mean, you know, you have, when you were talking about like problem to solution, solution to problem, right? Like, I mean, inevitably you have to start somewhere, right? Like back in the day, right? Like there was just, you know, a solution, right? Like you're doing pure research, right? And, you know, there's a zillion problems that you can solve, right? Like eventually you talk to hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people, right? And then you start to identify the problems that you could solve, right? Until you find something that you like, right? Personally, I think Ali and I, we both were looking for high impact problems, right? Like we like changing the world, right? Like otherwise we could be doing 1,000 other things, right? Like we do like to change the world, and we think infrastructure is one of those things that you could really change a lot of things in the world, right? And then I think we used to look at this video, and Ali might remember it. It's a video of a guy dancing alone, a guy or a girl, like the person dancing alone, right? And you see this person dancing like crazy, right? And then I don't remember how many minutes it lasts, but eventually you see someone else, right? Like joining the person, right? And it's just so slow, right? And then eventually there's a point when things go crazy and like everybody's dancing, right? And I think the first part of the problem, right, once you identify it, is, well, let's find people that believe in that problem, right? Like that believe that we can actually change the world and that this is a problem that it's worth addressing, right? And that's your very first customers, right? Or like people that give you the time to show them what you can do and how you can help them solve the big problem, right? And those are like the super early customers, more POC people, right? Like then let's find the actual people that would help us with the capital to change the world, right? Like the investors, right? And then, it's just like one brick at a time, right? Like we've been working in finding the innovators, right? Like the engineering firms, which are our customers, right? Right, to show that there's traction, that you can actually build up a business. And then, what happens after, right? Like, I think, so our goal really, it's when you what does that mean for us changing the world, right? Like there's two parts. One is, it is unacceptable, right, that at this stage and with the technology that we have around, you have bridges collapsing and dams collapsing, right, and keep killing people and making things extremely inefficient, right? We believe that shouldn't happen, right? So one of our goals is minimize the risk of failure, right? The second goal is optimize how you spend money in infrastructure, right? We spend $9 trillion of infrastructure around the world in an annual basis, right? And 40% of them, like, a little bit close to $4 trillion are suboptimally spent, right? And that's unacceptable, especially when you know that the amount of money that you're spending in infrastructure, it's not good, it's not enough, right? So the first thing that we have to do, it's like, or what we're doing is like building the foundations, showing that, there's a path to generate enough revenue and enough profit, right? Which is like the short-term problems of the industry, right? Like, how do you help the engineer? There's a ton of young engineers there that cannot stand the idea of going and counting cracks, right? Or counting damage, right? That's the part where you start, right? Hey, let's automate all these, right? That's this damage assessment, right? Then you go and like build a library, right? Of like, what's the stage of every single asset in the world, right? And eventually you get to a place where you understand at a macro level how infrastructure is evolving in real time, right? With like a spectacular amount of granular detail, right? And then you can really get to that goal, which is, hey, let's help with the big decisions, right? Like, let's optimize how we spend this money. Let's get ahead of the moment when a bridge is going to collapse, right? So that's sort of like the high level, at least how we see it, right? But
yeah, I mean, I love the visionary component of this. I think that's what a lot of startups miss. So I want to come back to that in a moment. We're going to take a little break to hear from our wonderful sponsors, and we will be back momentarily. All right, we are back, and I love this conversation. And I'd love to pull apart a little bit, how much of this is looking at what we've built and shoring up the problems that exist in current infrastructure, and then how much and how can we ensure that we kind of create the workflows that can easily be adopted, so we just build things in a more efficient and better way in the future. So I'd love to kind of pull those two parts.
Yeah, I think, Amy, one of the points, like not to harp on the Pittsburgh Bridge collapse, but I think the reality is we all go get annual physicals. We go buy a car knowing that we have to put gas in it and do scheduled maintenance. but government funds infrastructure with really no real plan to maintain and manage, like they wait for it to break. Right. So it's almost like buying a car and never getting an oil change and just waiting for it to break and then buying a new car. And I think part of it is they just don't know, like it's such a big problem, like prioritizing, forget about informing better design in the future. That'd be fantastic. But I mean, Ali, when you look at it, I mean, you practice as a civil engineer. I mean, the absurdity of the work we have to do, that's just highly preventative.
Absolutely. So I think that the biggest issue, or one of the main issues I would say, is we don't know how bad things are. Like understanding of, okay, I have this portfolio of bridges in each state and across the country, these 618,000 bridges. How bad things are in each and every one of them, like they don't have a good documentation. And therefore, they don't know when they should really deploy money and how much they should deploy. And as some of the state DOTs have told me, is they're managing by fire. Something goes down, they come and fix it. And so one of the key things that we are seeing that the company like ours can change is help these civil engineers and these people from both sides, whether it's the asset owner, it can be the DOTs, the Department of Transportation at each and every state and municipalities, and the civil engineers, to start to do things at a way more granular level and also at that objective way. So back to what KP was mentioning, right now the way things are, it's very much subjective. Like you have an engineer goes out in the field, they have to literally like hang from a bridge, eye roll, look for damages, and these damages are millimetrics. And then they have to take a couple of photos and maybe go back in their office and start drawing them in AutoCAD. So the whole thing is, you're starting at 7 a.m., you're sharp, you capture everything, but by 2 p.m., you'll start to feel tired, and you're not going to be as efficient as you were at 7 a.m. And you're going to miss this stuff. And you're going to start to ballpark damages. Like, I think this is 2 feet by 1 feet corrosion. And that's literally what happens. So next time you go out, like how much corrosion expanded, you don't know because the last person actually ballparked it. And now you're ballparking. And so super subjective. Then you start to do the rating, and it goes all the way that the whole rating system that we have goes from 0 to 9. And when you look at the standard deviation of that by sending different people out to do the inspection of the same bridge, it's plus minus 2. So somebody can say it's good, somebody can say it's fair, and so on and so forth. So the first piece is how we can change that part, how we can go from subjective, inconsistent information that we have, which as a result, we don't know how much we should fix and how much money we want and which one we should fix first, and so on and so forth. And that's where we come in to make that an objective assessment, something consistent, something that repetitive job of counting cracks, as an example, how we can give that to a machine to do it for us, or AI or computer, if you will, and basically have these engineers, like talented, experienced engineers, just do the part which is about the decision making. Okay, should I fix this? Should I not fix it? And at some point, when you have all those kind of documentation and understanding of the state of your assets, you start to see about, okay, as an example, let's go with bridges, which designs of the bridges, wind up being, staying for a longer time, and what kind of materials are holding better over time. Like all of that information and creating those kind of libraries just help us when we get to, okay, now let's build new things. Now you know which materials hold better, which designs are lasting a longer time, and so on and so forth.
You're not making me feel good about driving over bridges, which I do regularly, but
Amy, I tweeted out, like, if you knew the state of our bridges and facades, you wouldn't. And I had all these people DM me saying,
what do you
mean? Hey,
mean?
is there any way to integrate the bridge database, like the last time it was inspected, into Google Maps or Waze, so I can make a decision around avoiding them? I was like, that's actually like, I mean, You go eat a taco, they have a health inspection report. You know what you're
Right.
getting into. And so, by the way, sometimes when they get a B rating, they're the best tacos, right? It's okay with it. But you know, this idea though that we're driving around, and I mean, facades are the same thing. You know, you have these granite or facades on buildings. Those panels fall. It's not. I mean, this is like an everyday thing. And so somebody said, like, I don't understand. Like, why can't the government just take the last inspected date and push it to Google Maps and Waze, so we're all better informed?
Because you had government in that sentence. That's why it's not happening. It's just too much. So I'm gonna get audited for sure. I shouldn't say that. We're gonna have to edit that out. But that is part of the problem. I think it goes back to this vision statement where some of these problems seem completely insurmountable, but there are things like, let's start there. Let's just start informing the public, because that's also going to build up a groundswell of some public pressure to say, look, we need to solve these problems. And then everyone's going to look up and start looking around and hopefully find Aren, and you can start this process of really arming them with the right thing. There's something else that you said, Ali, that I think is an important message, is that this is another example where you're not replacing jobs. You're taking those engineers and you're putting them right side up in front of data instead of hanging them from bridges to count cracks. And it's a better use of their time. And again, not a replacement. It's giving them the tools to augment their job.
We're just empowering them. We're augmenting the process. That is correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
love that.
Amy, Ali and I had similar engineering experience. I used to rappel off the side of buildings to inspect facades. And the whole way down, you're like, I went to college for this. Like, I didn't go to college to participate in the X Games. Like, this is not what I signed up for. But like, you have to. I mean, that's the job. And I was like, okay, this too shall pass attitude, pay your dues and all that. But a lot of engineers say, this is, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I don't think that would be something that I would sign up for sure. But I do want to get to our final question with both of you. And I ask this to everyone who joins us. And it's about projecting yourself into the future, 20, 25 years. And you could bring with you any gadget or service that actually on a personal level just makes your life better or easier in some way, or just makes you happy. What would it be and what would it do? So Ali, why don't we start with you?
I mean, for me, it's a little bit of a tough question to answer, but I'll answer in two parts. Like, one, it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but I mean, and it's not that much personal, but it's like reducing the whole CO2 emission, like getting to a place in 2050 that the amount of CO2 that we put out there is going to the bare minimum. So we can see that our children and grandchildren and so on and so forth can live on this planet. But on the personal level, I think since I was a kid, I loved flying cars or thinking about them. So I would love to have a flying car by 2050, so I don't get stuck in traffic.
I think you might get your wish. I know Airbus for one, and a number of others are working on that. So I think you're going to get your wish for sure, maybe even sooner. How about you, Edgar?
I think I would like a teletransporter. And what I mean is, listen, I love, for example, working in New York, right? But hey, I want to go and hit the slopes of ski, in the afternoon, right? On a Friday, and it just takes too long, right? So I would love to be able to just like telecommute, like, press the button and be wherever you want, and come back. So that would be my wish.
That's a good one. Sometimes I would like to have some clones where I could just send one place, one another place, and then just me as me and my Uber consciousness gets to do all the fun stuff. But anyway, hopefully we'll get there. KP, I've never actually asked you this. Oh, actually, I think I have asked you this question.
I'm already living it. That's like
living the dream.
I don't leave my house. We're all just nodes on a network. It's fantastic. You don't actually know if this is me or some avatar. Like it's great.
Yeah, you could just be a video on a loop.
When we all first started going remote, I had multiple laptops. I was on the same Zoom call. Like I had multiple Zoom calls going, and I would just go off camera on one and back to the other. It was fantastic. It was highly efficient.
I love that. That's great. Gentlemen, Ali and Edgar, thank you so much for joining us. I love the vision. I wish you all the success because not only do you deserve it, but I think we all deserve it. We deserve some, safe infrastructure. So I'm glad you're tackling this problem.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you,
Great
Amy,
talking
for
to
having
you
us.
and KP.
All right.
Have a
Thanks,
great day.
guys.
Bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
So we are going to bring on our next guest, Mike Giacco from AI Engineers. Mike, are you hiding somewhere? There you are.
Here I am. How are you, Amy?
I'm
Good,
very well,
yourself?
thanks. Yeah. So tell us again, and like, feel free to take some shots at KP. This is your opportunity.
So the only shots I can throw at KP is the impressive pitch he made to us in terms of investing with his VC firm, and it was probably the first time in our conventional engineering experience that we ever really had considered in getting in some of that investment. So again, I can't say anything negative. The guy just, whatever reason, he's where he's supposed to be in the right places. So yeah, it's been a pleasure meeting and working with him so far.
He must be really, really good because that's what everybody says. It's kind of amazing, KP. I don't know.
I'm blushing.
But it is good. It is, we work with a lot of startups. A lot of them don't think about the type of investment they're taking, and they don't think about the investor. And, having smart money behind you and having someone who really does look, see, I'm even doing it. I'm complimenting you, but it's nice to see that, a group like Shadow Ventures is out there and supporting the solutions, right? And I don't get the sense from KP that you're out there just like, okay, what's my return going to be in 3 years? What's my exit look like? It's solving some of these hard problems. And Mike, I think you got a chance to hear Ali and Edgar a little bit, and would love to sort of hear your thoughts on how we move forward and a little bit more about what you're doing at AI Engineers.
Sure. So in terms of what Edgar and Ali are offering, it's obviously something that I think is pretty unique in the terms of the artificial intelligence solution they're delivering. I would say we sort of stumbled upon them. It was more that Ali reached out to me at a very opportune time, and we can get to that later in conversation. But what we found truly advantageous about their product was that you're basically doing your analysis in the third dimension. It's not a 2D product. It's not just a spreadsheet. And for really, hardcore engineers in the bridge industry, that's a fantastic deliverable for us. But for our clients who, most are bridge inspectors, so they know what we're turning around in terms of reporting and our input, but several others are not. They're just lay people like us with administrative jobs, but they're in charge of the money. If we can give them something that is a little bit more understandable and tangible to them, I think it just all across the board helps people understand their assets, understands how to make better decisions on future programming and addressment of some of those assets. And all in all, it just was something different that we hadn't seen before at that time. Where it really converges with our business at AI Engineers, like I've touched upon, where our most prevalent side of our business is bridge inspection and load rating. Obviously, that's exactly what Ali and Edgar's software is geared towards. Going back a little over 3 years ago, I had this thought about it was born from, I was walking through our office back to our marketing department, and one of our inspectors just came back from a crack mapping project, and it was the middle of winter. He was in his coveralls. He was still frozen even after a half-hour drive, but thawing on out. And I looked at him and I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. I mean, it just didn't make sense to me why these guys are out there doing their best in the worst of conditions. Go figure, at the bridge that they were crack mapping, I was fishing under it like a year later, and the idea just hit me. It was like, we can combine some of the technology that we have to do the data collection, and we could probably leverage artificial intelligence to speed up this analysis, or at the very least, generate a three-dimensional model that is literally reality, bring it into the office and scour the structure there in the office where it's safe, it's more, weather amicable, and it just makes life easier. So that's really how we kind of got to this point. We've implemented Aren's technology a few times now, and we've seen nothing but success and quality. It's really changed how we go about thinking how we'll approach given inspections as they come up cycle after cycle. And yeah, it's just been a real winner for us so far.
What do you think around, like, one of these missions around technology, right, is around transparency, and not to pick on DOTs. We know that part of it's resourcing and funding, and we take a lot of things for granted. The road is there. Why are we worried about it? It's just, we take things for granted as consumers. But I just look at this technology and I say, like, what is the citizen's right to know, right, in terms of reporting and transparency? Because technology gives us transparency. That's the whole idea, right? And whether it's roadway conditions, whether it's, there's that, whether it's accident reporting, which, is a big thing. And then we had that thing in DC on the highway in DC where everybody was like stuck on a road for a day. Right. And it's like, oh, that's weird. We have weather reporters and we have all this information. And whether it's bridges or road conditions, it just feels like we continue to pour money into new projects without really thinking about the existing. And we don't really kind of budget that way. And it just feels like, as taxpayers, like, we just want to know, right? I mean, the news might be bad. It's like when you go to your doctor, I mean, you're not looking for just good news. You're like, hey, what's the bad news so that I can course correct? But, like, do you see any trends around that? Like, where DOTs are saying, you know what, it's our duty to be transparent and report what's going on?
So to start my answer with the way you kind of started the question, certainly not here to offend any DOTs.
Right.
So I'm glad we have an edit button on this video. But with that being said, they are certainly saying that it is their duty to inform the traveling public to the best of their ability. And there are definitely, I would say more than none, or than none, are certainly making a concerted effort to that. I think really what it comes down to is the magnitude of that news. We've touched upon it, with Ali and Edgar during their conversation, but we know our national, bridge or infrastructure health rating is a D. I mean, to think about how much more space there is between an A and a D is immense. And can the American public handle that fact, that the gravity of the extent of the truth? Should they know? Absolutely. But again, if you're not a educated bridge inspector or engineer to understand that a global perspective of the entire problem is intimidating. But when you really begin to break it down, you begin to understand it better, and it isn't so insurmountable. If you take it in small bites, things like anything else in life will be, seemingly more achievable. But that initial shock factor, I think, is really why it's kind of a dangerous thing to go ahead and put that kind of level of detail out there. I don't want to say let's misinform the public, but we know how social media is. We know our keyboard warriors, and unfortunately, the influence that they have nowadays, as opposed to the truth out there. And those type of news stories are compelling, and they're dangerous, right? And it's something I think that sells more than, yeah, we've come up with, a 30-step plan. Sounds like a lot. So what's it going to take? I mean, to your point, there's more bridges that need repair than new construction. But that problem is a much more difficult problem to resolve than just saying, yeah, guys, things are bad, but trust us, you're okay to cross this bridge today.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of friends in politics, and what they tell me is, like, there's no ribbon cutting to repair a road. There's a ribbon cutting to open up a new bridge or a new transportation center. And, as politicians, like, we want as many ribbon cuttings as we can get. And it's just not, there's no sexiness in, like, oh, we fixed it.
Right.
Yeah.
And from a project approach as well, too, you're kind of new construction, almost starting with a clean slate, right? And in many ways, that's an easier route than it is to research the history of an existing structure, inspect it, load rate it, then get your design repairs out there. I mean, you could just see in describing the first few initial steps, it's a very exacerbated, tedious process, expensive process before you even get to the repair part. So a lot of the times, like you said, whether it's ribbon cutting or whether it's just ease of implementation, the new projects tend to go a little bit more easily. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we're probably going to have to cut in Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. It's like, you can't handle the truth. And I think that is part of the problem. And I think that, when you were talking about DOT, it's to the best of their ability. In a lot of cases, it's like they're underfunded, under-resourced. There's just, or they're, within their purview is just so much of, whether there's infrastructure, bridges, roads, all of it, that it's they have to kind of choose where they're spending their time. And again, without the data, it's hard to prioritize.
You're 100% right. I mean, DOTs are not immune to the current climate that everybody else is suffering from right now. If anything, there was already a trend that was happening that was the baby boomers all retiring, and that huge void and that vacuum between the next generation that's ready to come in and ready to backfill those senior level positions. Nobody's immune, unfortunately, and the DOTs are very much there. So you're correct in the sense that resources simply aren't there to maybe address the full amount of the project. But for instance, here where our home office is for AI engineers in Middletown, Connecticut, we're one of the smaller states, here in the country. Yet just to think about the amount of bridges we inspect in this home state of ours alone is, again, for most people, it's almost unfathomable. And you start driving around and you recognize the small culverts, the local single span bridges. We're in the several thousands in our small little stamp of a state in Connecticut. Now we expand out to all the other states and regions that we handle. There is a lot. And for the most part, it is all very old and it all needs to be addressed. Where do you prioritize? How do you go ahead and allocate the funding that is all flooding in right now, as we know, but all needs to be divvied up correctly and also applied for correctly? So there's a lot of challenges for the DOTs. I do not envy their position right now. It's certainly not the cushy state level job that everyone envisions that they have. It's very cutthroat right now on how they allocate all this funding right now, and certainly how they're going to go ahead and have the manpower to manage those projects.
What are you seeing? What are you seeing in your own firm? One of my hypotheses. I teach at Georgia Tech in the civil department, and everyone I show up and they all want to do a tech startup. None of them want to be a geotechnical engineer. Like, none of them are interested in any of that. But how are you seeing recruiting talent? This idea, I think Ali and I were talking about hanging off the side of a bridge. It just feels like we have a talent base that's coming into the workforce. Is oh no, give me an iPad, give me the tech tools. Don't give me a little orange surveyor's book, right? And a pencil. How are you seeing that, in terms of culture and hiring? And it just seems it just seems hard, right? There's so much of what we do is just so boring and regular. People actually want to be entertained at work these days, apparently.
You bring up a real reality. And for those firms that have really stretched their arms out and embraced new technology, it's been a differentiator. And that's how we really seen it for ourselves. First of all, going back to not hanging off a bridge, believe it or not, this younger generation, they must be thrill seekers, or the whole skateboarding, snowboarding thing is as common as any other sport nowadays, which it wasn't when I was a kid. But we have a team of, I believe, up to now around 10 Sprat level climbers that are literally, they are dying to find the next bridge that they can get out and climb on. So it's really interesting, that dynamic. But regardless of that very unique group that is in existence, first of all, trying to locate the resources that are qualified to handle professional level technology was difficult. To your point, you're now lecturing young people that are coming on out that are being trained in flying drones or utilizing LiDAR and laser scanners or AR and VR. The availability of that workforce that knows what they're doing with this stuff is becoming a little bit more inundated. But for it's really on the firms. Again, we found that when we conscientiously decided that we were going to start a drone program, we were going to go ahead and invest in LiDAR. We were getting a BIM department developed as well too. Once we put our feelers out, suddenly we noticed that there were these people in the market. A lot of them were millennials, and unfortunately, there's that negative connotation that all surrounds the millennial generation that we've all heard, and we're certainly not immune to it. So it took a conscientious perspective change on what's available, where the industry's heading. We also made a decision that we wanted the firm to become agile, and we made a real decision to just dive in headfirst in agility. And part of that was stop looking at things the conventional way. We're not looking just for an engineer that can check off boxes, back check reports, and interface with the client. There's really unique skill sets these young people coming out in this next generation have, whether it's video gaming or whether it's really trained in academia on how to implement a lot of this new stuff. So now we're seeing it more often, and we've been very fortunate to scoop up a lot of these young people and give them the opportunity to shine, and it's helped us advance our programming tremendously.
Yeah, when I've talked to
Right.
when I've talked to AEC, sorry, when I've talked to AEC leadership, they're also talking about this technology really giving them lots of flexibility around resourcing, because you have 9 people that are certified in something, but then all of a sudden you have a lot of that work in. We're investors in another company called EcoBot that does wetlands delineation. And they said, yeah, we get all the seasonality of real estate transactions. It's feast or famine, but I can't train someone up overnight on doing a wetlands delineation. But with the technology, now I can de-skill. It's like you're more of an operator versus you're just following the screens. Are y'all starting to see any benefit of that around like just resource being able to load level across skill sets?
100%. In the case of infrastructure inspection and in particular, utilizing drones, the ultimate goal has always been to not have myself as our lead pilot, a non-engineer, be the data collector. It was always to get that technology into the hands of the experts. Now, these guys have a full-time billable job. And when, to your point and to everything that Ali discussed, when you come back from a full day in the field, the last thing you're thinking about is donating your personal time to learn a technology. You want to get home, take a shower, and get some rest before the next day. So with different technologies, especially in the drone industry, evolving so rapidly, especially in the age of autonomy, we have the ability to take certain technologies that are so intuitive and get them in the hands of people that are trained enough to get them implemented, but have that conventional knowledge and experience to marry maybe the lack of hours training on a drone with the ability of the drone to think on its own. And then also taking their conventional experience to make up for maybe any of those shortcomings. We have one drone system in particular, it's very prevalent. It literally scours any subject that we would like to have mapped, creates its own flight plans, and at the push of a button, collects all the data and literally just pop the memory card on out and throw it into our preferred photogrammetry software, and the job is done. It doesn't take me, who can fly without GPS and years and hours of experience, to be thrown out there for one light mast, which is a waste of time, frankly. But now the guys that would be there doing the inspection, basically at the push of a button, can collect the data that I would have to be sent out there for. So it definitely democratizes things. It definitely makes it more accessible. And then, of course, acceptance internally. If the technology is feasible, it's doable, and it doesn't take a massive amount of training, now other satellite offices are doing it. It's not just what's emanating from the home office where I'm locating. Others are getting the confidence that they can do it themselves, and then they're going to go ahead and implement it themselves as well.
Yeah, I think that key too that you talked about, it's for the next generation workforce, and it's not even really millennials that's the workforce now. It's sort of Gen Z and Gen Alpha behind them, and they're not going to go to a company that is not using kind of the latest technology. They're all digital natives. They're going to expect it. I was telling the story that I moved recently and I misplaced my Apple Pencil. And so I was just going to go old school, just write things on paper. And I could not locate a writing implement in my house anywhere. And we're sort of there now. And so we do need to think about the future, and companies need to think about the future. Again, it's looking around, not just from a business perspective of what your products and services are and what problems you're solving, but who is going to be your workforce in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
No, very much agree with that. And, we mentioned it earlier, but the firms that are making a conscientious effort to foresee what the future is coming, this technology is going to be here. I mean, if no one's recognizing that yet, you're certainly on the slowest train, you know, coming on the tracks right now. So if we're paying attention and if we have good foresight, we have that vision. And unfortunately, the gentleman who's the A and the I in AI engineers, that's just a convenient name that was, you know, we chose 30 years ago before artificial intelligence was really prevalent. But Abul Islam, who's the owner of our company, for lack of better words, is a visionary, and he really foresaw where the industry was going to change and empowered people like myself and others at AI Engineers 6 years ago to take on this role that, you know, let us be the first, let us make mistakes, let us be the test, you know, subjects, but we're going to be the first ones to bring successful technology to our DOTs, and we're going to need those resources. So if your upper management understands and really foresees what's coming and this technology is here to stay, you're going to get the right people in house, and that comes from every level and every generation. If they're great video game players, most likely they're going to be able to fly a drone that afternoon. So
That's great. That is actually, you could not have kind of, you know, brought us into our last question with a better statement. So as you heard with our previous guests, I do ask the same question of everyone. And again, this is now kind of just, you know, going into your own life and what you want for the future, for yourself, for your family. So project yourself 20, 25 years in the future. You can have any gadget or service that just makes you happy. What would it be and what would it do?
Sure. So it's a little on the side of what Edgar had mentioned. So he kind of stole my answer a little bit, but I would love to have a transporter time machine. I think I'm like Edgar. I have no patience for travel. I love to travel to the destination, but everywhere in between, to me, just, I don't know. I'm an impatient person. It just seems like an inconvenience. So if I could just be placed somewhere immediately, especially with all the job sites I drive to all over the East Coast, that would make my life more convenient. And then the time, the time transporter side of things, just to go back and fix some stupid mistakes I made along the way. It's no regrets, but I think everybody has those few things that are like, darn, you know, if I could just go back and just check that one switch the other way, I would have made my life that much more easy. So yeah,
that's great.
Transporter time machine for sure.
Amy, I feel like
that's a great idea.
I feel like the time machine answer, like we need to take that off the list, because that's like the, you know, the genie grants you 3 wishes, and your first wish is to ask for more. Like,
yeah,
like it's like
we're
that.
cheating. Like you're kind of cheating.
Yeah, it's kind of cheating.
But I like that. Like sort of going back, like, was it a good decision? I don't know.
Hey, I'm all for trying and failing, but then there were those stupid high school decisions you made that were like, oh God, let me take that one back.
It's like, how am I still alive in some cases?
Basically. No, my mom and dad would be happier if we could hit the reset button. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, Mike, has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Amy and KP. Pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to see you.
You as well, too.